Chapter 11 The construction of the safe house is completed. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 3 days later, with Wu Huairan's help, Zhang Yi scored 2 guns and 100 rounds of ammo. The price was steep, but Zhang Yi didn't sweat it. With that kind of firepower, he felt a whole lot safer about surviving the end times. He also finalized the deal for the end-of-the-world meds with Zhou Hairan, snagging 2 crates of top-shelf imported drugs. Another week zipped by. Wu Huairan rang up Zhang Yi, telling him the safe room was done according to spec. He told him to come back to sign off on it. So, Zhang Yi checked out of the hotel he'd been holed up in and drove back to Yuelu community. Wu Huairan himself gave Zhang Yi the grand tour. When Zhang Yi stepped inside, his jaw dropped. Zhanlong Company really was a top-tier security firm. Their speed and quality when it came to building safe rooms were second to none. The whole place had been fitted with 100 mm thick steel plates, just like Zhang Yi wanted, and from the outside, it looked exactly the same as before Wu Huairan walked. Zhang Yi threw everything. The ventilation system is military grade, filtering out any harmful gases and protecting you from poison gas attacks. Plus, we redid the entire heating system with professional-grade materials from the Arctic Science Institute. Besides the fireplace built to your specs, it also cuts heat loss by 99.5%. Wu Huairan gave Zhang Yi a sly grin. And for added security, we installed a building-wide surveillance system. 300 cameras, covering every floor. Zhang Yi was speechless. All he could think was, damn, money talks. You can buy services normal folks can only dream of. He headed to the balcony and saw it had been transformed into a huge floor-to-ceiling window. Wu Huairan chimed in, the windows are bulletproof and explosion-proof, even stronger than the steel plates. Plus, they let in light and allow you to keep an eye on things outside. Zhang Yi was thrilled with the safe room. Short of an army with heavy artillery, nobody was getting in. Even if the whole building crumbled, his room would be fine. I'm seriously impressed with the safe room you built, Zhang Yi told Wu Huairan, grinning. Wu Huairan smiled back. He pulled out the contract and asked Zhang Yi to sign. If everything checks out, we'll need the final payment within 3 months. Zhang Yi nodded, still smiling. For sure, but he had no intention of paying. The idea of snagging a multi-million-dollar safe room for just the deposit of 100 million was wild. Zhang Yi flopped on the sofa, gazing at his fortress. Then it hit him. He'd overlooked something major: water. Zhang Yi smacked his forehead. Crap, how could I forget water? That even with the ice apocalypse, you could still get water by chopping ice, but that meant braving outside in minus 70 degrees, which was way too risky. Zhang Yi couldn't allow such a major flaw in his safe room. He hopped online and ordered 100 massive water storage barrels. They could hold 500 cubic meters of water, enough for years. Plus, he could always raid the warehouse for mineral water later, so the water situation was solved. The delivery guys were quick. A few hours later, the water barrels were at the door. Zhang Yi buzzed Uncle Yu, the security guard, and asked him to let the delivery guy through. The neighbors couldn't help but stare at Zhang Yi's latest haul. Is something wrong with Zhang Yi? Seriously, he buys weird stuff every day. Remember when they were renovating his place? I saw them hauling in steel plates, like, 4 inches thick. Haha, he's lost it. Trying to copy those safe rooms from movies. I've seen rich folks in videos do that kind of stuff. Isn't it a waste of time and money? Now he's buying all these buckets. Does he think Tianhai City's gonna run out of water? Zhang Yi ignored their mockery. He just smirked. When the ice apocalypse hit, they'd see who was crazy. He had no interest in trying to explain. They'd just write him off as a nutcase and wouldn't listen anyway. They'd probably accuse him of spreading panic and call the cops. Uncle Yu, the doorman, was chatting with Uncle Tang. He walked over, all smiles. Hey Xiaozhang, why all the buckets? Need a hand? Zhang Yi was touched by Uncle Yu's friendliness. Uncle Yu was a retired soldier, a good guy who had been a security guard in the community for over a decade. In his past life, he'd given his last food to a starving mother and daughter and ended up starving to death himself. He was a rare beacon of humanity in the apocalypse. So, Zhang Yi told Uncle Yu, this year's weather is weird. I have insider intel. This winter's gonna be brutal. Just in case, you should stock up on food and water. In case prices go through the roof later. Uncle Yu and Zhang Yi were cool with each other. He knew Zhang Yi was a stand-up guy, plus, old people worry, so when Zhang Yi said that, he got concerned. Xiao Zhang, really? Is this legit? Zhang Yi nodded. Look at all this stuff I got. Stock up on ramen and bottled water. You can't have too much. Uncle Yu perked up. He lived alone and always kept ramen and sausages at home. Since Zhang Yi had tipped him off, he'd make time to buy some more. Peace of mind was worth it, and those things kept forever. But Uncle Tang piped up, Xiao Zhang, you can't say stuff like that. We live in a stable and peaceful society. How could there be shortages? You could get in trouble for spreading rumors. They'll invite you down for tea. Zhang Yi rolled his eyes and blew him off. He'd done his part. What they did with the info was on them. Chapter 12 Empty a warehouse worth million. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Yi had a delivery guy drop off 100 huge buckets at his place, then he cranked open every faucet and started filling them up. At this rate, all 100 buckets would be full in about a week, tops. The days ticked by. Zhang Yi was a busy man. He started blowing through his savings without a second thought. He ate at the fanciest restaurants every day. Then he'd buy tons of takeout from those same restaurants and stash it all in his personal dimension. He also hit the shooting range in Tianhai City every day, practicing with crossbows and firearms, trying to sharpen his skills. He knew he couldn't become a martial arts master in a month, but with a crossbow, a gun, and a super safe, metal-plated house, he wouldn't have to sweat any danger coming his way. Naturally, his actions didn't go unnoticed, but everyone just wrote Zhang Yi off as a crackpot. They figured he'd lost it and laughed behind his back. Even Fang Yuqing started keeping her distance, not wanting to be associated with him, and so, the time continued to fly by. 20+ days had passed in a blink, and the end was looming. Zhang Yi had amassed a stockpile of supplies, including food, weapons, and heating equipment. Still, he wasn't satisfied with his level of security. He decided to set his sights on the giant Walmart warehouse. If he could get his hands on that place, he'd have enough supplies to last 10 lifetimes. So, Zhang Yi went back to the warehouse and clocked in like normal. The Walmart warehouse was staffed 24/7, but there were only about 10 people working the night shift. Zhang Yi decided to go with the simplest, most direct approach. He'd slip some sleeping pills into their tea. With the apocalypse less than a week away, he wasn't worried about getting caught. Since these were all people he knew, Zhang Yi pulled it off without a hitch. Once the drugs kicked in, they all passed out. Zhang Yi headed to the security room and shut down the cameras for the whole warehouse. After doing all that, he raced over to the warehouse itself. Staring at the massive building, Zhang Yi took a deep breath and began gathering supplies. All he had to do was glance at a shelf with his right eye, and with a thought, the whole thing would appear in his pocket dimension. First, he went to the beverage section. Hundreds of thousands of tons of mineral water, soda, and alcohol were stored here, including some high-end wines and liquors. Zhang Yi didn't discriminate, he just grabbed it all. Before long, thousands of cubic meters of booze had vanished. Next up was the fuel section. For household supplies, there were tons of anthracite coal and barrels of gasoline and alcohol. They were all the kind you'd use for home storage or camping trips. There were tens of thousands of boxes of anthracite coal alone, not to mention the solid alcohol and gasoline. Zhang Yi couldn't use all this stuff in 100 years. He snatched it all up without hesitation, using his years of warehousing experience to organize it in his personal dimension. That way, it would be easier to find later. The third area was the food section. The quantities here were even larger, tens of thousands of tons. Canned goods, packaged roast chicken and duck, snack foods, ramen, gourmet treats. Zhang Yi wasn't picky, he took anything and everything. Once he had the food squared away, Zhang Yi moved on to the sporting goods. He needed to make sure his safe house was stocked with sports gear, too. Even though space was limited in the safe house itself, he wasn't going to be choosy. After all, his pocket dimension had unlimited space. If he didn't grab it, someone else might. some of the items were especially useful, for example, baseball bats and fencing gear made pretty good weapons. During his looting spree, Zhang Yi found some particularly valuable stuff, like skiing and mountaineering equipment, including professional-grade cold-weather gear used by Olympic athletes. This stuff could withstand temperatures down to -150 degrees Fahrenheit. Zhang Yi's eyes lit up. This was the ultimate cold-weather protection for the coming ice age. He wasted no time in scooping up all the high-end cold-weather suits and sleeping bags in the warehouse, dozens in all. After a solid 2 hours, Zhang Yi had completely emptied the entire Walmart warehouse, a space covering millions of square feet. Looking at the huge, empty space, Zhang Yi felt an indescribable sense of satisfaction. Now, even if the ice age was the worst ever, he was confident he could live comfortably. Zhang Yi went back to his workstation, took a sip of the sleeping pill tea, then laid his head on the desk and drifted off. He didn't know how long he'd been asleep before someone shook him awake. Supervisor, something crazy happened. Wake up. Zhang Yi slowly opened his eyes and stared at his coworker with a confused look. What's going on? The warehouse employee, clearly shaken, pointed towards the warehouse and stammered, holy crap. The warehouse, it's been emptied. What? Zhang Yi slammed his hand on the desk and shot to his feet, wearing a shocked expression. He pretended to go check the warehouse, where he found the empty space as expected. Of course, Zhang Yi knew what had happened better than anyone. Still, his legs buckled a little as he said in a trembling voice, what happened? Why are all the supplies gone? The other employees looked just as panicked. Yeah, there was at least $1 billion worth of stuff in there. Even if you had a fleet of trucks, it would take days to haul it all out. How could it all be gone in the blink of an eye? They kept quiet about what happened when they suddenly fell asleep. After all, it was the night shift. Everyone liked to sneak a little nap here and there. Zhang Yi, wearing a serious frown, paced back and forth, pretending to be anxious. Then he turned to everyone and said, this is too weird for us to handle. We need to call our bosses and tell them what happened. Everyone was nervous, but not exactly terrified. The situation was so huge, it was clear they weren't at fault. The entire warehouse, filled with billions of dollars worth of goods, had vanished in just 2 hours. It was obvious they couldn't have done anything to stop it. They made a few $1,000 a month. They weren't going to kill themselves for the company. So, when Zhang Yi suggested calling their bosses, everyone agreed. Let the higher-ups deal with this mess. Zhang Yi immediately called the warehouse manager to report the incident. The manager was shocked and thought Zhang Yi was pulling his leg. Chapter 13 The Ice Age Comes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Yi pulled off the ultimate heist, emptying out the entire Walmart warehouse in South China. He transferred materials worth tens of billions into his personal pocket dimension. Then, with a straight face, he immediately reported the theft to Walmart's top brass. The news ripped through Walmart's South China executive team like wildfire. A swarm of shocked managers descended on the scene and called the police. Zhang Yi wasn't sweating it. I mean, how could anyone believe that tens of billions worth of supplies vanished from an entire warehouse in just 2 hours? It was insane. Even the most thorough police investigation wouldn't crack this one anytime soon. Still, he played the part, acting all nervous and scared, cooperating with the police every step of the way. After a night of questioning, they let Zhang Yi go. The police were baffled. They reviewed the warehouse's internal and external security footage. Sure, the internal cameras were conveniently offline. But how could anyone move millions of cubic meters of stuff without leaving a trace? Yet, a sweep of the external cameras showed absolutely no sign of any vehicle traffic, so, either those billions in supplies disappeared into thin air, or Walmart was pulling some kind of inside job. Logically, the latter seemed more likely. I mean, unless we're talking supernatural shenanigans, there's just no way millions of cubic meters of material can just vanish in 2 hours. And while someone like Zhang Yi raised a few eyebrows, that he just didn't fit the profile for something this massive. Even if there were internal accomplices, that wasn't the whole story. Zhang Yi was ordered to stay put in Tianhai City and be available for questioning by both the police and Walmart's internal investigators. Zhang Yi played along and was eventually released. Back at his apartment, Zhang Yi peeked through the blinds of his floor-to-ceiling window. It was December 12th, just 4 days until the Ice Age kicks off. All he had to do was hunker down at home, and he'd survive this thing, thinking about the tens of billions in supplies stashed away in his pocket dimension, basically everything he'd need to live. Zhang Yi felt a wave of relief wash over him. He went back to the bedroom and crashed. A night of maneuvering and police interviews had taken its toll. Zhang Yi slept until evening. He flipped on the TV and saw the news was all over the Walmart South China warehouse heist. With a theft this huge and bizarre, every major news outlet in the country was covering it. Someone must have been involved to empty such a large warehouse in just a few hours. It's gotta be an inside job. More than likely Walmart executives trying to scam the insurance company. Millions of cubic meters of supplies. Even with semi-trucks, it's impossible to move that much stuff in one night. Zhang Yi smiled to himself. Nobody would know the real story until it was all over. For the next few days, Zhang Yi stayed put. He knew the clock was ticking. He wasn't leaving his place unless he absolutely had to. The police and Walmart's corporate investigators called him in for another round of questioning. Sure, they were suspicious of his behavior that night, but they didn't have enough time to investigate thoroughly, and they had zero hard evidence. All they had was a hunch, not enough to arrest him. Meanwhile, acquaintances hit him up for the inside scoop, but Zhang Yi brushed them off with vague answers. Finally, December 16th arrived. The gamma-ray burst hit the planet at 2 a.m. It was only a flash, but the impact would be devastating. Zhang Yi had sealed up his apartment hours earlier and got a fire going in the fireplace. He knew that soon, energy would become scarce, and things like air conditioning and central heating would be useless. The only way to stay warm would be the old-fashioned way. At 2 a.m., he sat on the sofa in front of the massive windows, clutching a beer and staring out into the night. Suddenly, a flash of white light lit up the sky. Even though it was the middle of the night, the world turned as bright as dusk, but the light was gone in 2 seconds. Most people were asleep and missed it, but Zhang Yi knew exactly what it meant, and a shiver ran down his spine. He chugged the beer, the crispness of the Budweiser strangely calming. Zhang Yi tossed a few more logs into the fireplace. He flipped on the TV, watching the news while waiting for the real chaos to begin. Just a few minutes later, snowflakes started to fall. At first, they were tiny, but within minutes, it turned into a full-blown blizzard. The wind howled outside, and the snow seemed to turn into a terrifying monster. Snow came down on the city. That's nature for you, it doesn't ask for your opinion. Zhang Yi started to feel a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. He'd built the perfect safe house, but having lived through this once, he still couldn't help but worry. Could this $800 million fortress really withstand the coming temperature drop? But the fire was blazing, and the room was getting toasty hot. Even, Zhang Yi checked the indoor temperature and saw it was already 90 degrees. Outside, the storm had swallowed the city. Zhang Yi felt a little better, but he wasn't about to fall asleep just yet. He wanted to see what else the world had in store. There would be plenty of time to rest later. In less than half an hour, a thick blanket of snow had piled up on the balcony. Zhang Yi checked the news on his phone and found that reports of the sudden temperature drop had already flooded the internet. The web was filled with complaints. People were griping about how winter had come too early and they hadn't had time to buy winter clothes. This damn weather is already below freezing. The roads are going to be iced over tomorrow. How are we supposed to get to work? But not everyone was upset. It's snowing. We don't have to go to work tomorrow, haha. Friends down south were posting pictures of themselves in the snow, excited because they had never seen anything like it. Zhang Yi shook his head. This was just the beginning. The snow was going to keep falling for the next 3 months, and the temperature would keep dropping. They wouldn't be in such a good mood to enjoy the snow when that happened. Chapter 14 Extremely Low Temperature. I smile at the outside world. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Ice Age had begun. A freak snowstorm blanketed Tianhai City in the south, setting the internet ablaze. Some griped, others rejoiced, oblivious to the fact that this wasn't a temporary weather blip, but the start of something catastrophic. Zhang Yi, however, was chilling on his sofa, basking in the balmy 80s inside his safe house, sipping an ice-cold Budweiser. Life was good. Then his phone buzzed. It was the group chat, old classmates, hobby buddies, homeowners association members. OMG, where did all this snow come from? The forecast said nothing. I woke up freezing in the middle of the night. Cranked up the heat ASAP. Yeah, well, our heater's a joke. It's just getting colder. How long is this gonna last? I haven't even bought winter clothes yet. The chat was a flurry of exclamation points and complaints. Zhang Yi could tell most people weren't taking it seriously, just mildly annoyed. He knew better. He yawned, not bothering to read on. Back in his warm bed, he snuggled under a plush velvet quilt and closed his eyes. His bed was top of the line, stuff he'd liberated from a Walmart warehouse, especially the mattress. Supposedly the same model as some celebs, worth a cool fortune. Outside, the snow fell thick and fast, the wind howled. Inside, the fireplace roared, and the temperature was perfect. Zhang Yi was asleep in minutes. The next morning, his phone jolted him awake. It was Fang Yuqing, that White Lotus flower roused from a sweet dream. Zhang Yi was instantly grumpy. He answered, yeah. What's so important you're calling at this hour? Fang Yuqing seemed taken aback by his tone. Still, she pressed on. Zhang Yi, it's crazy cold out there. Did you know this was coming? Did you stock up? Her voice trembled, like she was struggling. A smirk tugged at Zhang Yi's lips. Of course, the White Lotus wanted something. He drawled, heard a rumor, didn't think it'd be this bad. He threw back the covers, noticing he was sweating slightly in the cozy room, slippers on. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, and his eyes narrowed. The snow had transformed the city into a white wasteland. Streets, trees, everything was buried. Only the faint outlines of buildings remained, with many first floors already submerged, and the snow kept coming, fat flakes swirling relentlessly. Fang Yuqing was still chattering away on the other end. No wonder you were buying up everything. Zhang Yi, you couldn't have given me a heads up. Zhang Yi frowned, annoyed by her audacity. He hung up and tossed the phone aside. Then, he treated himself to a steaming hot shower. Afterward, he pulled a prime cut of A5 Wagyu beef from his stash and cooked up a steak with pasta for breakfast. While he ate, he flipped on the TV. Power was still on for now, so he could watch the news. Even if the grid went down, Zhang Yi had backups. Dozens of generators and enough gasoline to last centuries. He tuned into the local news even though he knew what was happening. Watching the chaos unfold was its own kind of entertainment. On screen, the two anchors were bundled up in thick down jackets in a place like a TV station, with guaranteed power and central air, that was saying something. The female anchor faced the camera, trying to keep her voice steady. Last night, a massive cold front swept across the globe, causing a drastic drop in temperatures. We're seeing declines of 125 to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. Meteorologists are investigating the cause. In the meantime, we urge everyone to stay warm and avoid frostbite. Avoid unnecessary travel. Authorities are working to resolve this situation. There is no need to panic. Do not spread or believe rumors, and refrain from looting. This snow event will pass quickly. Zhang Yi scoffed. Once the ice age truly hit, you were on your own. Stay home and do nothing, and you'd be among the first to die. The temperature in the corner of the screen read -85 degrees Fahrenheit. Just yesterday, the high had been in the 50s, a drop of over 130 degrees. Zhang Yi shrugged. Just like in his past life, except now, he was in pajamas, sipping wine, and chowing down on steak and pasta, completely unaffected by the cold. Spending 800 million on a safe house, with special attention to insulation, had its perks. His phone buzzed again. He grinned, eager to see what his formerly scornful neighbors were saying now. Fang Yuqing was at the top of the list. Zhang Yi, why did you hang up on me? There's so much snow, I can't even get out. You bought so much food, can I borrow some? I'll pay you back when it's over. Zhang Yi raised an eyebrow, a smirk spreading across his face. The White Lotus was sharp enough to realize food would be scarce with this much snow. Rather than venture out in -85-degree weather, she wanted a handout. But Zhang Yi knew this wasn't a quick blizzard. This was a long-term disaster, and there was no way he was giving Fang Yuqing so much as a crumb. In his past life, he'd been suckered in by her act and given her half his supplies, and she ended up killing him, carving out his ribs. For soup. Zhang Yi just wanted to play with her, watch her suffer. A wicked grin spread across his face as he typed a reply. Too late. I've almost eaten everything I bought. Look, just made a steak this morning. That he snapped a selfie of himself, pajamas and all, with the steak and red wine in plain view. Chapter 15 White Lotus begs for supplies. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Fang Yuqing was huddled in her rental, wrapped tight in 2 comforters. Even with the air conditioner cranked up to 104 degrees Fahrenheit, the temperature inside barely hit freezing. She shivered, feeling like the icy wind outside was blowing right through the blankets. When she saw the photo Zhang Yi sent, her eyes popped. She couldn't believe he was lounging around in thin pajamas, eating steak and sipping Red Bull in this weather. They lived in the same building, for crying out loud. How could they be living in such different worlds? The sight of that delicious steak and fancy bottle of wine made her mouth water. Being a top-tier gold digger, she'd done her research on luxury goods. That steak looked like the real deal, top-grade Wagyu beef and that French red wine. Definitely chateau level, worth at least $3,000 a bottle. She was freezing to death, while Zhang Yi was living it up. The jealousy was killing her. She immediately texted him. Ugh, I want steak and wine too. That she thought she was being pretty obvious. The old Zhang Yi would have jumped at the chance to bring her some, but when he saw her message, he just smiled. Did she still think he was her personal doormat? He slowly typed back. If you want it, go buy it yourself. Fang Yuqing's face fell. Was he kidding? It was 70 below zero outside. Any exposed skin was at risk of frostbite. How could he expect a delicate girl like her to do something so crazy? Gritting her teeth, she fumed. Zhang Yi, you're such a loser. I practically handed you a layup, and you didn't even try to score. Ugh. That she still had some pride left. She really wanted that steak and wine, but in her mind, Zhang Yi was just one of her backup guys. Besides, she figured the blizzard would pass in a few days, so she tried to maintain her proud goddess act and didn't beg him for food. Zhang Yi ignored her and went to check out the group chats. Looking for some entertainment, he saw Aunt Lin from the HOA in their community group, telling everyone not to panic and to stay home. Everyone, relax. It's just a cold snap. It'll be over in a couple of days, tops. Don't go hoarding supplies. Trust the authorities. The HOA is working hard to help everyone get through this. Please follow the rules and don't make things difficult for us. Some residents objected. It's snowing like crazy. Who knows when it'll stop? It's dangerous to go out. Of course, we need to stock up. Exactly. We gotta get some food while we can. Prices are gonna skyrocket in the next few days. Aunt Lin's tone sharpened. What are you doing? Are you trying to cause trouble? Hoarding will just drive up prices. Everyone will end up paying more. Anyone caught hoarding will be reported to the higher-ups for inciting panic. Zhang Yi smirked as he watched Aunt Lin boss everyone around. It was only the first day of the Ice Age. The supermarkets hadn't been completely cleaned out yet. If you braved the snow now, you could probably still grab some supplies, even if it meant risking frostbite. But thanks to Aunt Lin's intimidation, many people were taking their chances and staying put. He could only imagine how that would end. Then, Aunt Lin zeroed in on Zhang Yi. She had a bone to pick with him. Zhang Yi, you already stocked up a ton of stuff. I hope you're not going to be a bad influence here. Stay home. If I catch you shopping again, don't expect any favors from me. Zhang Yi's face darkened. That old busybody. She was still holding a grudge because he hadn't given her what she wanted last time. She never missed an opportunity to take a jab at him, but he wasn't intimidated by some HOA lady. He scoffed. Aunt Lin, nobody knows how long this blizzard will last. If it goes on for weeks and people run out of food, will you take responsibility? His question echoed what a lot of people were thinking. Everyone was unhappy with Aunt Lin's orders, but they were afraid to speak up because of her position. With Zhang Yi leading the charge, someone else chimed in. Yeah, if we can't stock up, who's gonna be responsible when we run out of food? Are you going to pay for our groceries? Aunt Lin panicked when she saw the pushback. She hated Zhang Yi even more. how dare he publicly challenge her authority in the group chat. Don't worry. The HOA guarantees there will be no shortages. This storm will pass soon. And you, Zhang Yi, stop stirring up trouble. What you're doing is illegal. Huddled in her apartment, Aunt Lin seething that Zhang Yi is out of control. I'll find a way to get him locked up for a few days when this is over. Zhang Yi laughed. It was ridiculous that Aunt Lin was still trying to throw her weight around, relying on her petty power. Whoa, that's a heavy accusation. Relax, it's freezing out there. Even if you begged me, I wouldn't leave the house. Do whatever you want. He had already stocked up, so he didn't need to fight the crowds at the supermarket, but the people who believed Aunt Lin's lies were in for a rude awakening. Zhang Yi knew in his heart that when the end came, countless people would die from the cold and hunger, but some people deserved it, like the neighbors who had betrayed him in his past life. Whether they lived or died, Zhang Yi was focused on surviving. What did he care about anyone else? Chapter 16 Aunt Lin takes revenge. Zhang Yi directly attacks. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Yi slumped on the couch, letting out a bored yawn, while everyone else was probably freezing and starving. He was living the good life. His place had a top-notch insulation system and an endless supply of fuel, keeping it at a perfect, consistent temperature year-round. He didn't have to lift a finger. All he had to do was enjoy himself, but there was nothing good on TV. And all the live streams had been shut down because of the crazy low temperatures. Even his favorite bikini clad dancers probably couldn't handle -60 or 70, maybe even -100 degrees, to put on a show. If they could, Zhang Yi would have to give them props. Now that's hardcore. He opened his personal pocket dimension. In the electronics section, he had stacks of game consoles and all the latest AAA titles. He had hundreds of brand new, unopened PS5s, Switches, and Xboxes, and cartridges. Tens of thousands. Zhang Yi pulled out the newest PS5, hooked it up to his massive 100-inch Sony TV, and started gaming. He booted up this year's hottest action game, Bayonetta 3. He also had games like Elden Ring, The Witcher 3, and Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice ready to go, all great ways to kill time. And if he wanted something that would last, he could always dive into huge games like Civilization or Cities, Skylines. From now on, no more worrying about work or relationships. This was even better than life before the apocalypse. Since he was just hanging out at home, Zhang Yi was just chilling in his pajamas, snacking, and gaming, living the dream. Then, his phone rang. Zhang Yi checked it and saw that it was Aunt Lin from the neighborhood committee, stirring up trouble in the group chat. Zhang Yi, the roads are blocked by heavy snow. Grab your tools and come help clear it. Her tone was bossy. Zhang Yi noticed she'd asked everyone in the group to shovel, but hardly anyone responded. So, naturally, she came after him. Zhang Yi glanced at the snow outside, which had almost completely buried the first floor. There was no way anyone could clear 3 meters of snow by hand. Plus, Zhang Yi knew this snow was here to stay for at least 3 more months. Shoveling now would be like trying to empty the ocean with a teacup. Zhang Yi immediately shot her down. It's freezing out there. I'd turn into a popsicle. Even if I did shovel, I'd wait until it stopped snowing. A few people chimed in, backing him up. Yeah, it's like 70 below zero. You'd get frostbite in 5 minutes. We're not in Alaska, we don't have the gear for this. No way I'm going out there. Aunt Lin got all worked up. What's with the attitude? This isn't just for me, it's for everyone. You're all young and strong. If you don't step up to help in a crisis, what are you even good for? She singled out Zhang Yi for leading the resistance. Zhang Yi, in the name of the neighborhood committee, I order you to clear the snow. This is a critical moment. We have to unite and follow the leadership's orders. Anyone who defies me is defying the neighborhood committee. When the storm passes, you'll answer to the organization. Aunt Lin was really playing the neighborhood committee card. The homeowners suddenly clammed up. The snowstorm had just hit, and social order was still in place, so no one wanted to break the rules. Even though the neighborhood committee didn't seem to have much real power, they had enough to make life difficult, so nobody dared to cross them. Everyone went silent. Nobody wanted to stick their neck out. but a lot of people were hoping Zhang Yi would stand up to her, give her a piece of his mind, and be their voice. Zhang Yi knew what they were thinking. He smirked and thought they were all a bunch of cowards, but he wasn't about to swallow his anger either. He decided to go to war with Aunt Lin right then and there. He scrolled back through the chat and noticed that the people Aunt Lin had tagged were mostly young, easygoing folks in the neighborhood. She avoided the troublemakers and the people with real power, so Zhang Yi jumped in with a sarcastic comment, "Aunt Lin's right. Since it's for everyone, the neighborhood committee should lead the way. And speaking of young and strong, there are tons of people in this community. Why did you only call out a few of us? You think we're the easy targets? The socialites and trust fund kids don't even give you the time of day, do they? What, you wouldn't dare breathe wrong around them?" But when the other homeowners saw what Zhang Yi wrote, they were nodding with approval. Zhang Yi is saying what we're all thinking. Exactly. She's just going after the pushovers. Why doesn't she go bother Chen Zhenghao or Su Hao? That everyone knew who Zhang Yi was talking about. They lived in the same community, and they were definitely people you didn't mess with, like Chen Zhenghao, who lived in 601 on the 6th floor. He was a big shot in the construction business with hundreds of people working for him, or Su Hao, who lived in 802 on the 8th floor. His dad was a major developer in the city, and his family had connections in the government. Aunt Lin hadn't mentioned either of them once. Zhang Yi had just exposed Aunt Lin's bullying ways, and she lost face big time. She didn't have the guts to mess with those other guys, and they wouldn't give her the time of day anyway. People like her always kicked those who were down and sucked up to those in charge. If Zhang Yi had been this outspoken before, Aunt Lin never would have dared to try to get him to shovel snow. She felt humiliated and, in a fit of anger, sent a bunch of long messages to the group. Shoveling snow is a public service and it's for everyone's benefit. Some people only care about themselves and have no sense of duty at all. People like that are just dead weight in our community. If you don't want to do it, fine. There are plenty of others who will. Their civic spirit is clearly much higher than yours. And I'm not singling anyone out, I just don't have time to tag everyone individually. I hope you all understand and don't jump to conclusions. If you spread slanderous lies about me again, I'll call the police. Aunt Lin's excuses just made her look worse, especially that threat about calling the police, which made Zhang Yi laugh out loud. When the other homeowners saw Aunt Lin's messages, they got scared and started gathering their shovels, but Zhang Yi wasn't afraid of her at all, ignoring how unreasonable she was acting. The police wouldn't even take her seriously. Besides, didn't she still think society was functioning normally? Chapter 17 Aunt Lin who bullies the weak and fears the strong. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Yi didn't give a damn about Aunt Lin's nagging, but he was bored, so he decided to poke the old bat a little. Oh, Aunt Lin, you're all talk. If you're so tough, why don't you get Chen Zhenghao and Su Hao to shovel the snow? That he called them out by name in the group, not caring whose feathers he ruffled. Chen Zhenghao, aka Brother Hao, was a local thug. He was the same guy who'd broken into their place waving a hatchet. Su Hao, the spoiled rich kid, was the first one to jump Zhang Yi, basically, except for a handful of decent folks. The rest of these neighbors had ganged up on Zhang Yi, either attacking him or trying to steal his stuff. He could even guess they divvied up his belongings after he died in his past life, so Zhang Yi wasn't about to cut them any slack. He was ripping off their masks and enjoying their discomfort. Aunt Lin checked her phone, and her face fell. Zhang Yi calling her out like that put her on the spot. Honestly, if she backed down now, she'd be the laughingstock and no one would listen to her again. She reluctantly tagged Chen Zhenghao and Su Hao in the group. Neighbors, this community is our home, and snow removal is a team effort. I hope anyone who's free can grab their shovels and help out. A few seconds later, Chen Zhenghao, ID 25 #602, dropped a bunch of question marks. Then, he posted a voice message. Shovel snow. Shovel your own damn head. Are you blind? Can't you see it's still snowing like crazy out there? Seriously, is your brain broken? If you're sick, go to the hospital and shut your trap. I'll shut it for you, you wanna bet? Chen Zhenghao laid into Aunt Lin, and it wasn't pretty. the other residents in the group were practically doubled over laughing. Aunt Lin thought she was somebody, but nobody took her seriously. A low-level neighborhood committee member might sway the average homeowner, but a street tough like him wouldn't give her the time of day. Su Hao, the rich kid, also chimed in with a voice message. Shoveling snow ain't my problem. I don't have to work, so I can sleep all day if I want. Then, he posted a picture of himself lounging on a thick comforter with a woman in his arms. Su Hao had only bought that place to keep a mistress, and he was stuck there at the moment when Aunt Li asked him to shovel snow. He thought she was nuts. Aunt Lin, after being chewed out by Qin Zhenghao, didn't dare say a word. She wasn't about to mess with a real hard case, but seeing Su Hao's posturing, she stubbornly replied, "You're still a homeowner. Clearing snow is your responsibility." Su Hao sneered, "Yeah, right. I pay property taxes every month for what? Without my money, you busybodies on the neighborhood committee would starve. Heh, they use the homeowners' money to throw their weight around, acting like they're in charge. It's a joke. Those rich kids aren't stupid." Even though Su Hao was lazy, he'd seen the world. He wouldn't give a damn about some small-time neighborhood lady. He followed up with a smug jab. "I am where I am today because of my family's connections. Can't compare to you poor folks. Anyone who wants to shovel snow, go ahead. You need to get out there and earn a living. Only after the snow is cleared can I leave this hellhole." Everyone was furious at Su Hao's arrogant words, but they couldn't argue with him, who told them to be born less fortunate. Even if what he said stung, there was some truth to it. The fight between Qin Zhenghao and Su Hao had completely demoralized everyone. Aunt Lin's words were meaningless, and no one paid her any attention. Aunt Lin was fuming, but she wasn't mad at Qin Zhenghao and Su Hao. She was mad at Zhang Yi. She felt like she had succeeded in getting the homeowners riled up, but Zhang Yi had ruined her plans. So she sent a private message to Zhang Yi and demanded, "Zhang Yi, are you deliberately trying to make things difficult for me? What do you want? I asked everyone to help shovel the snow. Does everyone need to be involved? Now look, everyone stopped helping. Are we supposed to stay at home forever?" Zhang Yi raised his eyebrows. "Well, look who's come knocking for a scolding. Stop playing dumb. You're a coward who only picks on the weak. Why are you still barking like a dog? You can't even muster a peep after being yelled at by those guys. Are you just looking for attention? Let me tell you something, you can't push me around. Keep yapping, and I'll shut you up." Zhang Yi knew Aunt Lin's type. She's just a loser who bullies the weak and fears the strong. Sure enough, after Zhang Yi's threats, Aunt Lin got spooked. She's just an old woman living with her grandson, and the only reason people respect her is because of her neighborhood committee position. But if someone disregards her title and gets aggressive, she's not tough enough to fight back. She suddenly clammed up, afraid of actually provoking Zhang Yi. Aunt Lin quickly blocked Zhang Yi, worried he'd troll her again. Her body was trembling, whether from the cold or from being scared by Zhang Yi, she couldn't tell. That bastard. He's a lunatic. Better not to anger him now. Just wait, I'll find plenty of ways to make his life miserable in the future. Aunt Lin plotted how she would use her position on the neighborhood committee to make things difficult for Zhang Yi. For instance, when delivering supplies, she'd deliberately make Zhang Yi wait, or maybe she'd leave Zhang Yi off the list for community events. She imagined Zhang Yi's regretful expression, and even fantasized about him begging her for forgiveness, only for her to slam the door in his face and say, "So arrogant, aren't you? Well, who's arrogant now?" Aunt Lin thought about it and smiled. "Hee, your day will come when you come crawling to me. For now, I'm washing my hands of you." Aunt Lin was satisfied with this fantasy. Then she went back to the group to try and rally people to shovel snow. Even though everyone looked down on Aunt Lin, most folks needed to go to work eventually. Thinking about getting around, some honest types put on their winter gear and went out to clear the snow in the frigid cold. Zhang Yi didn't expect that he had just scolded Aunt Lin, and someone would come looking for trouble. This time, someone called my WeChat number. He glanced at the profile picture and saw that it was Qin Zhenghao from the group. Apparently, Zhang Yi's mockery had stung his pride, so he called to try and intimidate him. Zhang Yi had plenty of resentment for this lowlife. When he saw the call, he narrowed his eyes. Honestly, he was hoping this idiot would come looking for a fight. After all, Zhang Yi couldn't leave this safe house, but if anyone dared to come over and make trouble, he had plenty of ways to make that person suffer. So Zhang Yi answered the phone. Chapter 18 Who is Afraid of the Ruthless One? You are listening at novelfull.audio. As soon as the call connected, a barrage of angry threats exploded in my ear. You got a death wish? Who told you to run your mouth about me in that group? You mess with me, Chen Zhenghao, and you'll be begging for death. I can make you disappear from this city so fast, your head will spin. You got that? Chen Zhenghao was a notorious bully in Tianhai City, ran with a crew of over 100 guys. Word was he'd been mixed up in some serious, life-or-death stuff. Everyone in our building knew to steer clear of him. Nobody wanted any trouble. Chen Zhenghao was all about maintaining his rep. If you crossed him, even a little, you'd pay the price. That's just how these tough guys roll. Even though Zhang Yi just mentioned him in passing to the other tenants, Chen Zhenghao saw it as a challenge. He was still screaming into the phone, "You wanna die, punk? Think you're so tough talking shit? I'll give you tough." Of course, Zhang Yi wasn't about to take that lying down. He shot back, "Tough guy, huh? You're just bottom-feeding scum, a total loser. Kiss my ass." Zhang Yi unloaded, feeling a surge of satisfaction. He'd been bottling up this rage ever since the bastard led the raid on his home and got him killed in his past life. Chen Zhenghao didn't expect Zhang Yi to talk back. He went ballistic, cursing even louder. Zhang Yi just said, "You're a pathetic excuse for a human being, all talk, right? Who you trying to scare? Go choke on something." Then, Zhang Yi hung up and blocked his number. After letting him have it, he cut off all contact. The thought of Chen Zhenghao's face on the other end of the line made Zhang Yi grin. He walked over to the TV and switched on the security cameras. When Zhanlong Security Company built his safe house, they wired the whole floor with cameras. He had eyes on everything now. Zhang Yi checked the 6th floor, where Chen Zhenghao lived, and sure enough, their door burst open pretty quick. Chen Zhenghao stormed out, wearing a puffy jacket and carrying a baseball bat like a weapon. He immediately regretted his outfit choice. It was colder than a witch's tit outside. It was well below zero out there. And he was trying to look like Mr. Macho, sporting just a down jacket with a bare chest tattoo. The freezing air immediately brought him back to earth. Seeing the coast was clear, Chen Zhenghao rubbed his hands and jumped into the elevator. Zhang Yi sat on the couch and grabbed a crossbow from under the coffee table. This was a hunting crossbow. It could take down a 600-pound wild boar, driving an 8-inch bolt deep into the animal's flesh. He hummed to himself as he loaded it. He'd gotten pretty good with the crossbow lately. At under 50 feet, he could nail a watermelon-sized target every time. The elevator climbed, and Zhang Yi went to the door, crossbow loaded and ready. His massive security door had a 2-meter-high firing port. Zhang Yi hopped on a chair and unlatched the port's cover from the inside the only way it could open. Then he aimed the crossbow at the hallway, just in case. Zhang Yi had his pistol in his pocket, too. Chen Zhenghao was gonna have a bad day, no matter how tough he thought he was. A few minutes later, the elevator dinged, and Chen Zhenghao staggered out, still cursing. He'd gotten Zhang Yi's address from the tenant group chat. He got to the door, raised the baseball bat, and started hammering away while shouting, "Zhang Yi, you little coward, come out here. What's up? You were so bold earlier, now you are hiding. You want to see how I beat you to death?" Chen Zhenghao roared, slamming the bat against the door. But that security door was 8 inches thick and made of bulletproof metal. It could stop a tank shell, no problem. Chen Zhenghao wasn't going to make a dent with a baseball bat. All he did was hurt his hands. Chen Zhenghao kept yelling. He didn't realize he was in the crossbow's sights. Zhang Yi watched Chen Zhenghao's tantrum, a smile playing on his lips. The crossbow was aimed at Chen Zhenghao's head. Then, he thought better of it. In this apocalypse, everyone in the building was going to die, except for him. Chen Zhenghao was no exception. What fun would it be to just kill him? He remembered being eaten alive by these crazy neighbors in his past life. A wicked grin spread across Zhang Yi's face. He wouldn't let the bastard off that easy. Zhang Yi adjusted his aim. There was only the soft whoosh of the crossbow bolt flying through the air, and it slammed into Chen Zhanghao's leg. The crossbow bolt that could kill a wild boar went right through his calf. Chen Zhanghao screamed and collapsed, clutching his leg and wailing. In this 70 below zero weather, Chen Zhanghao's leg was doomed, thanks to the puncture wound, and without medicine, infection was a sure thing. He was going to die a miserable death, racked by pain and cold. Chen Zhanghao was in agony. He finally realized he'd messed with the wrong guy. These thugs only act tough when they think nobody will stand up to them. They bet that normal people are too afraid to fight back, but when they run into someone who's willing to use a crossbow, they get scared real fast. Chen Zhanghao was so terrified, he didn't even see where the arrow came from, but he was a tough guy for a reason. He dragged his crippled leg back to the elevator. Zhang Yi didn't shoot again, because he wanted Chen Zhanghao to suffer. After all, he wasn't a monster. Chen Zhanghao stumbled back into the elevator, dripping with sweat that instantly froze in the sub-zero temperatures, but his heart was colder than the air. The attack had been merciless. He felt pure, unadulterated killing intent. Anyone who'd shoot someone with a crossbow in this day and age was not to be trifled with. Chen Zhanghao looked at his mangled leg, where the crossbow bolt had torn clean through his calf. Blood had soaked his pants, then turned to ice. In the extreme cold, the pain wasn't as sharp, but that didn't comfort Chen Zhanghao. It only made him more afraid. If he didn't get treatment soon, his leg would be useless in less than half an hour. Chapter 19 Give you an ice bath. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chen Zhanghao finally felt real fear. He pulled out his phone and tried to call 911, but the line was dead. He tried for over 2 minutes, nothing but a busy signal. A chill went through Chen Zhanghao. The weather was brutal, and even the hospitals were shut down. Even the hospitals that were still running couldn't risk sending out ambulances in this blizzard. Chen Zhanghao was no pushover. After a long pause, he decided to operate on himself. He had to get that bolt out. He managed to get home and grabbed a knife, alcohol lamp, gauze, and some clotting powder from a drawer. He'd been in enough scraps to keep that kind of stuff around. Chen Zhanghao cut open his pant leg. The sight of the wound made him go pale. The sub-zero temperatures had frozen the wound on his leg, that had stopped the bleeding for the moment, but the area around it was turning purple, and he couldn't feel anything in his calf. Chen Zhanghao felt a wave of despair. He knew he was on his own. Luckily, he was a tough guy. He took a deep breath and started cutting because his calf was frozen. The cold numbed the pain, so, without any kind of anesthesia, he managed to get the job done, but the pain was so intense, he nearly passed out, and it was clear that leg was done for. Chen Zhanghao lay on the sofa, gasping for air, his heart filled with hatred for Zhang Yi, the guy who'd shot him. Zhang Yi, you little punk, I'm gonna kill you, I swear. His eyes burned with murderous intent. He wasn't kidding around. He really planned to take Zhang Yi out. How else was he supposed to hold his head up in this city? Chen Zhanghao picked up his phone. Zhang Yi had blocked him, so he had to tag Zhang Yi in the homeowners group. Zhang Yi, you little shit, you just wait till I get my hands on you. I promise you'll never forget the name Chen Zhanghao. The other residents had no clue what was happening, but once they figured out Zhang Yi had pissed off Chen Zhanghao, they couldn't help but feel bad for the guy. Chen Zhanghao was a real gangster, and he played rough. Of course, if they knew Zhang Yi had shot him with a crossbow and crippled him, they'd be too stunned to talk, but some people were loving it, like Aunt Lin, who was still fuming about Zhang Yi's earlier snub, thought, good, let them fight it out. They're both no good. I hope Chen Zhanghao beats that Zhang Yi to a pulp. That'll teach the jerk to yell at me. That even the pristine Fang Yuqing saw the message in the group. She rolled her eyes, hoping Chen Zhanghao would give Zhang Yi what he deserved. Why else should Zhang Yi act so cold to her? Couldn't he even bring her order to her door? But no one in the group dared to say a word. They didn't want to get dragged into the mess. Zhang Yi burst out laughing when he saw the message. As long as he stayed inside his safe house, he didn't give a damn about 100 Chen Zhanghaos. Zhang Yi sent a voice message. Who do you think you are? All bark and no bite. You mess with me again, and your other leg is gone. That when the other residents heard that message, the group went nuts. They couldn't believe Zhang Yi was talking back to Chen Zhanghao. And it sounded like he'd already taken out one of Chen Zhanghao's legs. Chen Zhenghao gripped his phone so hard he thought he'd break it. Zhang Yi, you moron, you just wait, I'm gonna kill you. Zhang Yi wasn't backing down, come on over, tough guy. Let's see who drops first. After the world went to hell, Zhang Yi was feeling strangely liberated. He didn't have to worry about rules and regulations anymore. He didn't have to answer to anyone, and it felt great. On the other end, Chen Zhenghao was about to blow a fuse. He finally regained some feeling after getting back inside, thanks to the weak heat from the air conditioner. But the throbbing pain in his leg made him grit his teeth. Now, if he wanted to move at all, he'd need crutches. After thinking it over, Chen Zhenghao figured killing Zhang Yi wouldn't be too hard. He'd only been shot because he wasn't expecting it. Now that he was on guard, he could call up his boys, storm Zhang Yi's place, and beat him into the ground. Besides, the weather was terrible. The hospitals and police were doing nothing. If you wanted to get away with murder, now was the time. Chen Zhenghao immediately called his crew and told them to grab their gear and come help him take out Zhang Yi. A lot of Chen Zhenghao's guys lived nearby. When they got the call, they headed straight over to Chen Zhenghao's place, packing machetes, baseball bats, steel pipes, and anything else that could do some damage. When they saw Chen Zhenghao's leg, they started yelling about how they were going to beat that bastard to a pulp for him. Chen Zhenghao said coldly, I'll be fine. I'll just wait for the snow to melt and go to the hospital for a while. But that little punk dared to shoot me. He wants to start a war. If I let him get away with that, how am I supposed to live? One of his boys spoke up, tell us his apartment number, brother Hao, and I'll go chop him up right now. Chen Zhenghao nodded. He's in 2401 in this building, but he's sneaky. He's got a crossbow. That's how he got me. Another guy hoisted up a steel pipe and yelled, that's low. A sneak attack, Chen Zhenghao said, just be careful. I know he's the only one there. As long as you don't let him get a shot off, kick in the door and take him out. Chen Zhenghao's crew were all rough characters. They knew Zhang Yi had a weapon, but they didn't care. If anything, it just made them want it more. With the city locked down because of the snowstorm and no cops around, they could go wild and beat up anyone they wanted. They were ready to unleash their worst instincts. So, they grabbed their weapons and headed for Zhang Yi's apartment, ready to kick down the door. Zhang Yi knew Chen Zhenghao wouldn't back down that easily and would come looking for revenge, but Zhang Yi wasn't worried in the slightest. He was at home, playing video games while keeping an eye on the security cameras throughout the building. He had a clear view of Chen Zhenghao's goons as they approached. His table was covered with weapons, just waiting for them to show up. Those thugs deserved to die, and Zhang Yi wasn't going to show them any mercy. Soon enough, a dozen of Chen Zhenghao's men were at Zhang Yi's door. They knew Zhang Yi had a crossbow, so they were being extra cautious. A few of them carried wooden boards as shields. They checked to make sure everything was clear before making their move. Open the door. You idiot, you dared to shoot our brother Hao, we're going to teach you a lesson. Today's your funeral, open the door. As they shouted threats, they started hammering and prying at Zhang Yi's door. They wanted to break in, beat Zhang Yi senseless, and drag him back to Chen Zhenghao. Zhang Yi kept playing his game. He was stuck on the first boss, and he died 7 or 8 times already. He was already in a foul mood. Hearing the yelling and banging outside, Zhang Yi finally snapped. Is that all you got? You hit like a bunch of pansies. That just made Chen Zhenghao's guys even angrier, and they started hitting the door harder. But the security door was made of 8 inches of solid alloy. You'd need a bomb to open it. There was no way they were going to break it down with simple hammers and pry bars. After a long time, they managed to chip a little paint off the metal, but the door hadn't even dented. The thugs were speechless. Damn it, this door's made of solid metal. How are we supposed to break it down? Who the hell is this guy? The thugs were stuck. They'd promised Chen Zhenghao they'd beat Zhang Yi half to death and bring him back. If they couldn't even get through the door, they couldn't go back. So, they kept banging and yelling outside. Zhang Yi's character died again in the game. Hearing the yelling outside, he finally lost it. He went to the kitchen, connected a hose to the faucet, and climbed up to the peephole. The thugs outside didn't notice anything strange. Zhang Yi smirked, then turned on the faucet and blasted them. The water poured out like a waterfall, drenching them in seconds. Chapter 20 Start living a peaceful life. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Can you imagine having ice water dumped on you when it's 70 below? Zhang Yi grabbed a huge pipe and hosed down those punks outside. The temperature difference between inside and outside was close to 100 degrees. The water came out steamy, but it froze almost instantly when it hit them. They were already bundled up in down jackets and sweaters. The freezing water soaked them to the bone, like being dropped into a meat locker. Fuck. It's freezing. I'm gonna die. Ack, stop. Stop spraying us. At that moment, they'd rather take a beating than endure that icy torture. Their lips turned blue from the cold, and some even went into shock from hypothermia. Driven by pure instinct, they bolted away from Zhang Yi's place. 10 seconds was all it took to get them drenched from head to toe. They didn't even make it to the elevator before their clothes were frozen stiff. Zhang Yi watched them scatter and turned off the water. He'd initially planned to teach them a lesson with his crossbow, but reloading took too long, and they might shoot back through the peephole. Flooding them turned out to be way more effective. After Zhang Yi's cold shower, the gang's lips were purple. They raced back to Chen Zhanghao's apartment. Chen Zhanghao was furious when he saw them shivering and soaked. Where's that little bastard? Did you bring him back? The guys scrambled for blankets and sheets to warm up. Their clothes were soaked through and frozen solid. A dozen guys were fighting over the meager supply of blankets. Because there weren't enough to go around, they stripped off their wet clothes and huddled together for warmth. It was a bizarre sight. Chen Zhanghao slammed his hand on the table. Somebody better explain to me what the hell is going on. That once they regained a little body heat, they told Chen Zhanghao the whole story, shivering the entire time. That Zhang Yi is a scumbag. He blasted us with a hose. I couldn't take it. And their door is like Fort Knox. We beat on it forever and barely scratched the paint. Chen Zhanghao frowned. He'd noticed how solid Zhang Yi's door felt when he'd knocked. Breaking in by force seemed impossible, but then he smirked. Doesn't matter. Even iron castles have weaknesses. And he can't stay cooped up inside forever. You guys stake out the place. The second he steps outside, you beat him down. Chen Zhanghao spat out the order. His crew were all hardened thugs. They shivered and sneered, trying to look tough despite being half frozen. Little did they know, Zhang Yi had no intention of leaving his apartment. Outside was hell, but inside was heaven. Why would anyone go from heaven to hell? After dealing with Chen Zhanghao and his goons, Zhang Yi went back to his game. He knew they wouldn't give up easily, but they couldn't break into his place. And going outside? He wouldn't do it if his life depended on it. Even a 1 in 10,000 chance was too risky. Wasn't it better to chill at home? Later, Zhang Yi glanced out the window. Some people were trying to shovel the snow. He spotted Uncle Yu, the security guard, a stand-up guy and a veteran who always jumped in to help. A dozen or so younger residents were also there, good-natured folks, but Aunt Lin and the other busybodies from the neighborhood association were nowhere to be seen. They were hacking away at the 2 or 3 meter deep snowdrifts. Zhang Yi knew it was a waste of time. Clearing a path from the building to the community entrance would take all day, and even if they did, the streets outside were completely buried. That kind of snow required heavy-duty snowplows to clear, but they didn't have equipment like that down here. Getting out was impossible. Besides, they couldn't last long in 70 below weather. Their gear wasn't warm enough, and they weren't adapted to the extreme cold. Half an hour outside could mean frostbite. Zhang Yi shook his head. He felt bad for those people, but it was their choice, and he wasn't going to get involved. It was nothing to do with him. He just wanted to survive. By afternoon, Zhang Yi was hungry, so he pulled out a gourmet meal from his stash. Nothing fancy, just a plate of Australian lobster, a beef Wellington, 2 sesame cakes, and a Coke. His storage space was full of stuff like that. Stuck at home, Zhang Yi's schedule had become flexible. He slept when he was tired and ate when he was hungry, without any concern for day or night. The snow kept falling. Zhang Yi glanced at the street. The snow clearers had given up. The path they'd worked on was already covered again. They must have realized they couldn't beat Mother Nature on their own. Zhang Yi was lounging on the couch in a light sweater. The temperature inside was a pleasant 27 degrees Celsius. He turned on the TV. Most stations had gone off the air, but a few provincial channels and CCTV were still broadcasting. they were mostly airing propaganda about the government's efforts and encouraging everyone to stay positive. Our focus is on Xinjiang. The authorities are strategizing and directing the final assault on the snow disaster. Reports indicate that the national snow disaster has affected 200 million people, resulting in tens of millions of deaths. The snow disaster in our country is under control, and everything is progressing in a positive direction. We urge everyone not to be anxious or panicked. Trust in the power of the authorities. Zhang Yi shook his head. The scale of this disaster was beyond anything they could imagine. They were trying to help, but human power was insignificant compared to what was happening.